Some family secrets are buried for a reason. When I inherited my great-great-grandmother's mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, I thought I was simply receiving a piece of American history, a stunning Gilded Age estate that had been in our family for over a century. What I discovered hidden behind a false wall in the dusty attic would shatter everything I thought I knew about my lineage and explain decades of unexplained tragedies that had plagued our family. The leather-bound diary I found belonged to Evangeline Whitmore, my great-great-grandmother, a woman whose name had been whispered in hushed tones at family gatherings, but whose true story had been carefully erased from our family history. As I opened those yellowed pages, written in her elegant Victorian script, I realized why her story had been hidden for 120 years. This is not just a tale of wealth and social climbing during America's most opulent era. This is a story of desperation, supernatural obsession, and a pact that cursed generations of my family. What you're about to hear challenges everything we think we know about the price of ambition and the thin veil between our world and something far more sinister. The Whitmore mansion stood like a Gothic monument against the gray October sky when I first walked through its doors as a new owner. Located on Bellevue Avenue, the heart of Newport's legendary Gilded Age district, the three-story Victorian masterpiece had been abandoned for nearly 2 decades after my gray-tan's mysterious death. The musty air carried the weight of forgotten conversations and long-extinguished gaslights. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears from ornate ceilings, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched my every move with eyes that seemed to follow me through the shadows. I had been methodically going through each room, documenting the antiques and family heirlooms, when I noticed something peculiar in the third-floor attic. While measuring the space, I realized the room was significantly smaller than it should have been, given the mansion's exterior dimensions. Running my hands along the eastern wall, I felt a subtle variation in the wooden paneling. After an hour of careful examination, I discovered a hidden mechanism, a small brass lever disguised as a decorative rose in the wallpaper pattern. When pressed, an entire section of the wall swung inward, revealing a secret chamber that had been sealed for decades. The hidden room was no larger than a walk-in closet, but contained treasures that would rewrite my family's history. Stacks of yellowed photographs showed lavish parties with guests in elaborate Victorian finery. There were invitation cards to exclusive society events, newspaper clippings documenting Evangeline's social triumphs, and jewelry boxes filled with gems that seemed to capture and hold the dim attic light. But it was the diary that made my hands tremble as I lifted it from its resting place on a small mahogany desk. The leather cover was deep burgundy, embossed with Evangeline's initials in gold leaf that had somehow retained its luster despite the decades. The pages were filled with her meticulous handwriting, dated entries beginning in 1897 and ending abruptly in December of 1899. As I opened the first page, a loose photograph fell to the floor. I picked it up and found myself staring at a woman of extraordinary beauty, Evangeline at perhaps 25 years old, wearing a beaded gown that would have cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Her dark hair was elaborately styled, and her eyes held a confidence that spoke of someone who had never known want or fear. But it was the last photograph in the collection that made my blood run cold. The same woman, taken just 2 years later, looked haggard and wild-eyed. Her once lustrous hair hung limp and unkempt. Her dress was simple and worn, and her eyes held a terror that seemed to reach across the decades to grab me by the throat. The diary's first entry was dated September 15th, 1897. Tonight marks the beginning of a new chapter in the Whitmore legacy. The invitation arrived this morning, sealed with black wax and bearing a symbol I've never seen before. Mother says it's from the most exclusive society in all of Newport, one that doesn't advertise its existence but holds more power than the Astors and Vanderbilts combined. I am to attend a gathering at the old Blackwood estate tomorrow night. They say only those chosen by fate itself receive such an invitation. I spent the entire night reading, and with each page, I felt a growing dread that had nothing to do with the October chill seeping through the mansion's windows. This was not simply the diary of a wealthy socialite. It was a documentation of a woman's descent into something far darker than mere madness. The early entries in Evangeline's diary painted a picture of the American dream at its most glamorous. The Whitmore family had built their fortune in shipping and steel, positioning themselves among Newport's most influential residents during the height of the Gilded Age. Evangeline was the crown jewel of their social aspirations. Beautiful, educated, and married to Charles Whitmore III, heir to a railroad empire. Her diary entries from late 1897 documented a life of unimaginable luxury. Elaborate dinner parties where a single meal cost more than most families spend in a year. Shopping expeditions to Paris where she would purchase entire wardrobes from the finest couturiers. Charity galas where the wealthy displayed their philanthropy like peacocks showing their feathers. But beneath the glittering surface, I began to detect signs of something troubling. Evangeline wrote obsessively about maintaining her position in society, about the constant pressure to outshine her rivals, about the fear that one social misstep could result in exile from the only world she had ever known. The turning point came in her entry dated November 3rd, 1897. I met her tonight, the woman they call the Countess, though I suspect that title comes from a realm far removed from European nobility. She approached me during the Astor's autumn ball, seemingly appearing from the shadows near the garden terrace. Her age was impossible to determine. She could have been 30 or 300. Her dress was exquisite, clearly worth a fortune. But it was her eyes that held me captive. They were the color of midnight, and seemed to see straight through to my soul. The Countess, according to Evangeline's increasingly frantic entries, had made her an offer that seemed too good to refuse, in exchange for certain favors, which Evangeline never explicitly detailed. The mysterious woman promised to ensure that the Whitmore family would never want for money, influence, or social standing. All Evangeline had to do was attend certain private gatherings and participate in what the Countess described as ancient rituals of prosperity. What happened next changed everything. Evangeline's diary entries became increasingly erratic, both in handwriting and content. She wrote about midnight ceremonies held in the basement of abandoned mansions, about chanting in languages that hurt her throat to pronounce, about offerings made to entities she could never quite see clearly, but whose presence filled her with both terror and exhilaration. The financial benefits were immediate and dramatic. Charles's railroad investments, which had been struggling, suddenly became incredibly profitable. The Whitmore Shipping Company secured exclusive contracts that their competitors had been pursuing for years. Evangeline herself began receiving gifts from anonymous admirers, jewelry, art, and even property deeds that appeared mysteriously on her doorstep. But the price began to reveal itself in December of 1897. Evangeline wrote about nightmares that felt more real than her waking hours, about voices that whispered to her in the darkness, about a growing compulsion to do things that her rational mind recognized as increasingly dangerous and bizarre. The Countess says I must be patient, she wrote on December 20th. The entities she serves operate on timescales beyond human comprehension. What seems like generosity now is merely an advance payment for services that will be collected across generations. She showed me things last night, visions of what my family line could become if I remained faithful to the compact. Wealth beyond imagination, influence that spanned centuries, power that could reshape the world itself. What do you think drove Evangeline to make such desperate choices? Could you imagine yourself in her position, facing the loss of everything you'd ever known? Share your thoughts in the comments, because what comes next in her story will make you question whether some prices are simply too high to pay, regardless of the circumstances. As winter deepened in Newport, Evangeline's diary entries revealed a world within a world, a secret society of the wealthy elite who gathered for purposes that had nothing to do with charity galas or social climbing. These were people who had discovered that their fortunes came with strings attached, and those strings led back to entities that existed in the shadows between our world and something far more ancient and hungry. The Blackwood estate, where these gatherings took place, had been abandoned by its original owners under mysterious circumstances in the 1870s. But the Countess had somehow acquired access to it, transforming its basement into what Evangeline described as a temple that belongs to no earthly religion. The walls were lined with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed in peripheral vision, and the air itself felt thick with whispered promises and barely contained malevolence. Evangeline's entry from January 15th, 1898, provided chilling details. Tonight's ceremony required a different kind of offering. The Countess explained that the entities we serve grow stronger with each ritual, but they also grow more demanding. What once satisfied them with mere tokens now requires pieces of ourselves, memories, emotions, years of our lives willingly given in exchange for continued prosperity. The rituals themselves defied rational explanation. Participants would stand in circles drawn with substances that Evangeline never identified, chanting words that seemed to bypass the conscious mind and speak directly to something primal and terrified deep within the human psyche. During these ceremonies, Evangeline claimed to see the other participants as they truly were, not as wealthy socialites, but as hollow shells animated by something that was slowly consuming them from within. But the most disturbing revelation came in her entry from February 3rd, 1898. I understand now what the Countess meant when she spoke of generational contracts. The wealth and power we receive doesn't truly belong to us. It's borrowed against the souls of our descendants. Every dollar we gain, every social triumph we achieve, creates a debt that will be collected from our children, our grandchildren, and their children after them. We are not building legacies. We are constructing elaborate traps for everyone who shares our bloodline. Despite this horrifying realization, Evangeline found herself unable to stop attending the ceremonies. The addiction to the power and influence they provided was stronger than her fear of the consequences. She wrote about attending increasingly bizarre rituals where participants were required to sacrifice not just their own vital essence, but pieces of their sanity, their capacity for human love, and their ability to find peace and sleep. Her handwriting during this period became increasingly erratic, sometimes changing mid-sentence, as if different personalities were taking control of the pen. She described seeing her reflection in mirrors and not recognizing the woman staring back at her, someone whose eyes held depths that seemed to go on forever, someone whose smile revealed teeth that were just slightly too sharp to be entirely human. The social consequences of her involvement became apparent by spring of 1898. Other wealthy families began to distance themselves from the Whitmores, though none could articulate exactly why. Servants quit, without explanation, often in the middle of the night. Even Charles began to notice changes in his wife, though he attributed her increasingly strange behavior to the pressures of maintaining their social position. Evangeline's entry from April 20th, 1898, marked a turning point. The Countess visited me in my dreams again last night, but this time she wasn't alone. She brought one of them, the entities we've been feeding with our rituals. I cannot describe what I saw because human language lacks the words, but I understood its message with perfect clarity. The debt is coming due sooner than expected. The entity showed me visions of what will take from each generation of my family, not just wealth or status, but something far more precious. Our capacity for happiness, our ability to form genuine connections with other human beings, our very souls themselves. Despite knowing the true cause of the compact she had entered, Evangeline found herself powerless to escape it. The entries from summer of 1898 documented her desperate attempts to find a way out, consulting with priests, mediums, and scholars of the occult. But everyone she approached either couldn't help her or disappeared entirely after learning the details of her situation. Thank you so much for staying with this video until this point. I truly appreciate your time and your interest in this terrifying family history. I promise you that what's coming next will completely shock you. The final entries in Evangeline's diary contain revelations that will explain not just her fate, but how this supernatural curse has continued to affect my family for over a century. The final phase of Evangeline's diary, covering the period from September 1898 to December 1899, documented her complete psychological collapse as the true scope of the supernatural contract became clear. What had begun as a simple exchange of favors for wealth had evolved into something that would destroy not just her own life, but create a pattern of tragedy that would follow the Whitmore bloodline for generations. Her entry from September 13th, 1898, revealed the horrifying truth. The Countess explained the final terms of our agreement today, and I now understand why she smiled so coldly when I first accepted her offer. The entities she represents don't simply take what they're owed and disappear. They establish permanent residence within the families they've claimed. Every Whitmore descendant will carry a piece of this darkness within them, a seed that will grow stronger with each generation until it finally consumes everything we are. The immediate effects on Evangeline were devastating. Her once perfect health began to deteriorate rapidly, but not in any way that doctors could diagnose or treat. She aged decades in the span of months, her hair turning white and her skin developing a translucent quality that made her veins visible like dark rivers beneath paper-thin flesh. Her eyes, once her most striking feature, became hollow and sunken, as if something was consuming her from the inside out. But the physical changes were nothing compared to the mental torment. Evangeline wrote about constant whispers that only she could hear, voices speaking in languages that predated human civilization, but whose meaning was always crystal clear. The debt was growing, the interest was compounding, and collection would be swift and merciless. Her entry from November 8, 1898, contained perhaps the most chilling revelation of all. I have seen them, the future generations of my family line. The entities showed me visions of what they will become, how each one will suffer for the choices I made in my arrogance and desperation. My great-grandchildren will know poverty where we knew wealth, madness where we knew clarity, isolation where we knew love. But worse than that, they will know why they suffer, carrying the knowledge of my betrayal like a poison in their blood. Charles, meanwhile, remained largely oblivious to his wife's supernatural predicament, attributing her declining condition to the stress of maintaining their social position. But even he couldn't ignore the strange occurrences that began plaguing their household. Servants finding rooms that had been cleaned the night before filled with an impossible amount of dust and decay, mirrors that showed reflections of people who weren't there, and a persistent smell of sulfur that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The Whitmore fortune, which had grown exponentially since Evangeline's first contact with the Countess, began to evaporate just as mysteriously as it had appeared. Charles's railroad investments failed overnight due to accidents that defied explanation. The shipping company lost entire fleets to storms that meteorologists insisted had never existed. Properties that had been worth millions became suddenly worthless when inspections revealed structural damage that had appeared literally overnight. Evangeline's final coherent entries, written in December of 1899, revealed her last desperate attempt to break the supernatural contract she had discovered, through research in occult texts at a cost to the last of the family's remaining wealth, that there might be a way to transfer the curse to someone outside the bloodline, but only through an act of such pure malevolence that would guarantee her damnation in any afterlife that might exist. "I cannot do it," she wrote on December 15th, 1899. "I cannot save my descendants by destroying an innocent soul. Whatever happens to our family line, whatever suffering comes to those who share my blood, at least they will know that in my final moment of choice, I chose love over salvation. Perhaps that will be enough to break the curse eventually. Perhaps someone generations from now will find the strength I lack." Her final entry, dated December 23rd, 1899, was written in what appeared to be her own blood. "They are coming from me tonight. I can hear them scratching at the walls, whisper my name in voices that sound like wind through graveyards. Charles sleeps peacefully beside me, unaware that when morning comes, he will find only an empty bed and the faint scent of sulfur where his wife once lay. To whoever reads this, run. Burn this diary. Sell the mansion. Change your name and flee to the furthest corner of the earth. The Whitmore curse is real. It is hungry, and will never stop hunting those who carry our blood." After reading Evangeline's final entry, I sat in that dusty attic for hours, trying to process the implications of what I had discovered. But as the October sun set behind the mansion's Gothic towers, I began to realize that this wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was a warning that had come too late. My research into the family history, conducted over the following weeks, confirmed every horrifying detail in Evangeline's diary. Charles Whitmore had indeed reported his wife missing on Christmas Eve, 1899. Despite extensive searches, her body was never found, though neighbors reported seeing strange lights in the mansion's windows and hearing screams that seemed to come from underground. Charles himself died less than a year later, officially from a heart attack, though witnesses described his final moments as resembling someone being torn apart by invisible forces. The pattern of tragedy that followed the Whitmore bloodline was undeniable once I knew what to look for. Every generation had suffered unexplained financial ruin, mysterious deaths, and members who exhibited signs of what doctors could only classify as inherited mental illness. My great-grandfather had died in an asylum, claiming that shadows were trying to steal his soul. My grandfather had lost the family's remaining wealth in a single disastrous business deal that made no logical sense. My father had struggled with depression and paranoia his entire life, eventually taking his own life when I was 15. But I was different, I told myself. I was educated, rational, and skeptical of supernatural explanations. Even after reading Evangeline's diary, I convinced myself that the family's troubles could be explained by genetics, bad luck, and the psychological impact of believing in a curse. I was wrong. The changes began subtly, just as they had for Evangeline. I started having dreams about the Countess, though I had never seen her photograph or any detailed description beyond what was in the diary. She appeared to me exactly as Evangeline had described, ageless, elegant, and possessed of eyes that seemed to contain entire universes of darkness. In these dreams, she would smile and remind me that debts could be inherited just like assets, and that my family's account was now severely overdrawn. Within a month of finding the diary, my successful architecture firm began losing clients for reasons I couldn't understand. Projects I had worked on for years were suddenly canceled without explanation. The IRS began an audit that would eventually reveal discrepancies I knew I had never made. My wife started pulling away from me, claiming that I had become cold and distant, though I felt no different than I had before. But it was the physical changes that finally convinced me that Evangeline's curse was real. I began aging rapidly, just as she had described in her diary. My hair, which had been dark brown, started turning gray at the roots. My skin took on the same translucent quality that had afflicted my great-great-grandmother. Most disturbing of all, I began to see things that weren't there, shadows moving independently of their sources, reflections that didn't match the people casting them, and occasionally glimpses of the Countess herself standing in corners of rooms where no one should have been able to hide. The final confirmation came on Halloween night, exactly 1 month after I had found the diary. I was working alone in my office when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. When I opened the door, I found a woman standing there, not the Countess, but someone younger, dressed in contemporary clothes but with that same unmistakable aura of supernatural authority. "Hello, descendant," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I represent the current management of your family's account. We've been very patient, allowing your bloodline to accumulate interest for over a century, but the time has come for a significant payment." She handed me a contract written in the same archaic language that had appeared in Evangeline's diary, though somehow I could read every word perfectly. The terms were simple. I could continue the family tradition by entering into active service with the entities, participating in modern versions of the rituals that had doomed my great-great-grandmother, or I could attempt to pay the debt in full through the sacrifice of my remaining life force. There was a third option, she explained with obvious amusement. I could pass the curse to my own descendants, the children I didn't yet have but might someday. The entities were infinitely patient and would wait as long as necessary for the Whitmore bloodline to produce new generations to torment. As I write this final account, sitting in the same attic where I discovered Evangeline's diary, I face the same impossible choice that she did 120 years ago. I could save myself by damning others, or I could sacrifice myself in the hope that my death might finally break the cycle of supernatural torment that has plagued my family for so long. But unlike Evangeline, I have one advantage. I know her story, and I know that love proved stronger than fear when she faced her final decision. Tonight, when the entities come to collect what they believe they're owed, they'll find that the Whitmore bloodline ends with me. I have no children to curse, no descendants to torment, and no intention of allowing the supernatural parasitism to continue into another century. If you're reading this account, it means I succeeded in breaking the curse, even if it cost me everything to do so. The Whitmore mansion will soon be demolished, its unholy secrets buried beneath tons of concrete and steel. The diary has been destroyed, its pages finally receiving the fire that Evangeline wished she could have given them. But remember this story, because it serves as a warning about the true cost of ambition and the dangers that lurk in the shadows of high society. Some prices are too high to pay, no matter what's offered in return, and some debts can only be canceled to the ultimate sacrifice. This true story of my family's supernatural curse demonstrates how the desperate pursuit of wealth and status can lead to consequences that echo across generations. Evangeline Whitmore was a woman who had everything, lost everything, and in her desperation made choices that condemned her entire bloodline to over a century of supernatural torment. What would you have done if you had discovered such a dark secret in your own family history? Do you believe that some curses can truly pass from generation to generation, or that the power of love and sacrifice can break even the most ancient supernatural bonds? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might help others who are facing their own family mysteries and dark legacies. If this story impacted you as much as it impacted me to live through it, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to receive alerts about more real family secrets that challenge everything we think we know about inherited curses and supernatural debts. Your support helps us continue investigating and sharing these experiences that prove truth is always stranger than fiction. And don't miss our next video. Subscribe to the channel and enter the placelet and follow other stories so intriguing and frightening like this. Click on the screen to watch it now.